This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 91. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Welcome back, CBT School family. I am so thrilled to have you here today. Today is a big day for me and for you and for all of us. And the reason I believe that is because today we have an interview with probably one of the top 5 people who influenced my life, I would say. And I am so thrilled to have her on, but I'm not going to tell you just yet. The reason I'm not going to tell you is I really want to give you some context as to why this episode is so important to me. Okay. So many of you already know my own personal struggle with disordered eating disorder. So much fear and dread and panic and obsessions and compulsions around food and exercise. And I feel comfortable saying I think that many of us on a spectrum struggle with this one issue. I think that the fear we experience around food is such a huge part of our own relationship with ourselves and us trusting ourselves and us having peace with who we are in our body, the body that carries us around every day. And I feel like so many of us, we have been trained to think this way around food and to have so much fear around food and to have so much fear around our body. And as you may know, or I'm sure of you, if you don't, you can go back and listen to the episode where I really talked about my own struggle. This is something that nearly destroyed me, or in some sense did destroy me. And this week is actually National Eating Disorder Awareness Week, and I felt so called to start this conversation with you guys. I know we don't talk about this a lot, and some of you may even not feel like this applies to you, but believe me, it does. There is so much fear around food and body and our sexuality and how we relate to our body and the food and the exercise that we do. And this episode is going to be with Evelyn Tribole, who is the co-author of a book that pretty much changed my life. The book is called Intuitive Eating, a Revolutionary Program That Works. And it is brilliant. If you haven't already read it, please do go. And if you have read it, read it again. It's a book that I feel like I go back to and I check in with. I think we're all on a journey of breaking free from this fear we have around food and this fear we have around the bodies we think we should have, or the bodies that we completely disown, and that we tell ourselves that it's a bad body. And so I really just love this book. And I am so thrilled to share with you this week's interview with Evelyn Tribole. She is a hoot. I just love her, and she brings so much passion and so much information and education and research, and she's just brilliant. You guys are going to love her. Now, what I would have you be prepared for is she's going to challenge some pretty deep-rooted beliefs that you may have. And you might even get through part of this and feel quite triggered. You might get through part of this and feel like you strongly have a strong emotion about it. But what I really encourage you to do is keep pondering it. I want you to really think about how deep-rooted diet culture has affected the way we see ourselves and the way we see food, And now is where I'm going to start to invite you to really challenge that. Really challenge the beliefs you have around food, the fears you have around food and your body, right? So I'm just going to get right into the show because this is just gold. Really, really, it is. I'm so excited to share this with you. But before we do go into the episode, I wanted to share with you the I Did a Hard Thing segment. And today we have Zach, who posted in CBT School Campus, the Facebook group, and he said this amazing thing. And I have to say, Zach, I am really resonating with you right now because this is something that I am always working on. Zach says, I filed my taxes today in spite of my intrusive thoughts regarding my memory and comprehension. I did no ritualizing. And then he put a huge big exclamation mark. Great job, Zach. That is doing the work, right? You did the thing that you're afraid of in spite of your fears of, not having the right memory or understanding it correctly. P.S. something I totally get and I totally resonate with. And so I really was excited to share this one with you all because this is a huge one, right? I'm sure for Zach and for many of us, there's also so much fear around money. And P.S. we got some fun things happening in that area too, coming up on the podcast as well. My goal this year is to dive into the many facets of fear that really trouble us and reduce the quality of our life this year. So I'm really, really excited about that. So well done, Zach. So excited. And I'm just going to take it right over to the show. Again, before we move in, I just want to honor again the work you guys are doing. I want to honor the struggles that you're going through. And I want you to know that I see you and I believe how hard it is. Sometimes people feel like no one really believes how hard it is for them. But I really want you to know that this is a place where you are being seen, that your pain is being heard, and that we're all here together, rooting for each other, which is true. You guys keep blowing me away with how supportive you are in the Facebook group, on Instagram posts, in, how you communicate with each other, in the general sense of just being there for people who are struggling. So I honor you, and let's get over to the show. So I'm so excited to have here with us Evelyn Tribole. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I'm just going to let you take the spotlight. Tell us what you do. What is your work?
Oh my gosh. I want to put an end to unnecessary suffering. And one way of doing that is helping to heal our relationship with food, mind, and body. And you are right. I see it so often that this worry about eating, the worry about the body, it sucks the life force out of you. And so we need to kind of tend and befriend our body once and for all and realize that we're in charge and our body actually has this natural wisdom if we can tap into it.
Now, that is so fascinating to me because I think that when we tend to be anxious people, all raise your hand, I'm raising my hand, I'm one of them. When we're anxious, we tend to become what I call very heady, which is like we're trying to figure it out up in our head and we try and think that we have more control and power than we do. So tell us about the amazing book, Intuitive Eating, which is like the Bible for me in terms of around relationship with food. Tell us how we can get more in touch with what our body needs.
It's going to sound so basic. It's not going to sound like me saying just breathe. But what it really is getting in connection with the direct experience of your body. Because you said something very key. When you're in your head, you're not in your body. And so actually in the work that I do with my patients is I'm constantly helping them to distinguish, well, is that a thought or is that a direct experience? So let's use a basic example. I have patients say over and over again, I couldn't possibly be hungry. I just ate an hour ago. And so they're pissed off and they're annoyed. When I said, wait a minute, let's take a look. And what's the direct experience happening in your body? And the cool thing is direct experience is happening right now in the present moment. So what it takes is being just a little bit quiet and then just checking in. What is it that I'm feeling? And so classically, I'll ask somebody, what are you feeling in your body that gives you the perception that you're hungry? And in all likelihood that you are. They might say an emptiness in the stomach, growlingness, so on, or a sense of not feeling complete with their eating. And so another way of looking at all of this that I'm talking about, this connection has to do with something I'm so excited about, and it's called interoceptive awareness. And that's like our superpower. That's our ability to check in to our physical sensations that arise within the body. And what's so cool about that? That includes states like hunger, fullness, having a full bladder, feeling physically sleepy, but every emotional feeling has a physical sensation. So it's a superpower if we can just stop for a moment and check in. So back to this situation where someone's saying, I can't be hungry. So one of the things I'll have someone do is I'll say, well, think about, have you ever been in a meeting or maybe in a class situation, you got to pee, maybe you just peed, a half an hour ago, but you don't ever question that your bladder is full. I've never had anyone question that. You can certainly be annoyed, and it's annoying because you just peed, but maybe you drank a big old, coffee or soda or something like that, and we never question it. So what ends up happening when we get into our heads, we start judging it and starting wanting to make our body wrong. And then there's a direct process through this, is we just stop and listen. What is it that my body needs right now? Is it possible that I'm hungry? Is it possible that I didn't eat enough? You might be eating your regular breakfast, but maybe you're having a hungrier day. That can happen.
Right. So where do you think we are getting those rules from? So obviously when someone says, like, I quote unquote shouldn't be hungry, where do you think we're getting those rules from?
I think we're getting these rules from diet culture, and diet culture is all around us. You don't have to be a member. It has already hijacked you. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's all shouldn'ts. And, I'll ask someone, where did you get these rules or these expectations around eating? And they'll say, I don't know. And it's not that you have to know, but if you've ever been on a food plan, a dieting plan of any kind of thing, you might have just picked it up in that and just kind of embodied it. And another point I want to make, especially since so many folks in your audience have anxiety, when we're in this place of anxiety, as you know, there's a physical sensation to it, and the intensity is different for different people. But one of the things it can do, because your body's getting ready to fight or flee the enemy, and it's not convenient to be digesting food, your blood flow goes from your digestion to your extremities. So you actually, in an anxious moment, may not be feeling physiologically hungry. And when the anxiety goes away, it's dampened down, all of a sudden you have this big old hunger. And it's because it was there before, it was just masked over by the layer of anxiety. Does that make sense?
It totally does. It's actually one of the questions I had for you is, really commonly what I see in my office is, let's say someone just has a basic anxiety disorder, so they don't have an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And because they're experiencing such an experience of anxiety and panic, they will either have no hunger at all, or maybe they're depressed as well, so they have no sense of hunger, or that the anxiety is creating like a nausea. And our normal reaction to nausea is like, I should listen to my body. Obviously, my body doesn't need to eat, but that's not actually what the anxiety is there to say. So what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a really good one. And this is something we actually address in our intuitive eating workbook. And this has to do with this idea of nourishment as self-care. Because there are going to be times in all of our lives, it's happened in my life. In fact, I'm going to give you one of my most profound examples. It's a freeze frame moment. My mom had ovarian cancer. She died. It was very, very sad. I'm talking about it very matter of factly now, but it was many years ago. And I was going to be giving her eulogy. And I woke up that morning. And by the way, I'm used to doing public speaking, but to do it for the death of your mother, I was really afraid I was going to be hijacked by emotion. What if I can't, all those anxious thoughts that popped up. So I wake up, I'm feeling nauseous. I know I've got this big talk to give, and I do not want to eat. Eating sounds like chewing on glass, and that's the last thing I want to do, So I started asking myself, okay, what is something that I can tolerate in the here and now with my body feeling this way that's going to sustain me through the task that I want to do? And that is to be on my game. And because I'm in touch with my body, I also know that I'm sensitive to low blood sugar. I do not feel good and I do not focus and I'm kind of a bitch. So as a side note, I hate to own that, but I get kind of more we can own, the more we have value in taking whatever action it is. So it's like, it was very clear to me, I do not want to chew anything. That sounded repulsive. And I actually liked food, but not in that moment. And so as I was scrolling through my index of experiences, I think I ended up having like a smoothie and a latte, and that worked fine. I was able to sip it. And in that moment, that's when it crystallized for me. We need to have our little index of what I call nutrition 911 meals and snacks. And these basically are foods and meals that you already have an experience with. You already know that you like the taste of them. You already know that at least you tolerate them. And then it has to match your energy level. You know, if you're feeling anxious, you're not going to be feeling like sitting down and cooking a 5-course meal and eating it. So we have to be kind to ourselves and realistic about our energy demands. And so it's nourishment as self-care. And being a human being, we all have this happen where our hunger goes offline. It's no different than back in my college days. I had a car that wasn't so reliable, and the gas tank, sometimes the meter wasn't correct. It would say full all the time. And if I relied on that, I would run out of gas. And it's the same thing with our body, is that we know as biological beings, while we're awake, we need to feed our bodies every 2 to 6 hours. So that's where we use the wisdom of our mind, the wisdom of our experiences, and say, okay, what is a nourishing self-care act I can do? And where it gets really tough, I get a fair amount of referrals for folks who, they're not for anxiety, they don't have eating disorders, but it's affecting their eating. And the nausea is a really tricky one, because the act of eating even just sounds repulsive. And so I'll have these conversations and I'll ask what even sounds good. And as we have these conversations, things like lemonade and potato chips, and I'll say, that would be awesome. And I'll have a patient say, but I can't eat that. And I'll say, well, why not? Well, I'm not supposed to, you know? And so we have to look at the critical moment, and that is your body needs nourishment. That's something that sounds good and you can tolerate. You know, and God forbid, if you were to pass out and you were admitted to ER, they're going to stick straight IV sugar in your veins anyway, you know? So there's such a fear mongering right now in our culture, you know, and it's what we do over a period of time, not what you do in one day or one meal. It's not going to make or break your health or anything like that. So sometimes we have to step out of our situation, say, what's the kindest thing I can do for my body right now?
Right. So I want to go back to your comment about diet culture, because someone had asked, and then I'll show you how she wrote it. She said, what is exactly, in caps, diet culture? So can you give us an idea of what that actually means?
Yeah, it has to do with the unspoken beliefs and rules in our culture. So much to the point that asking about someone's weight loss or what food plan they're on is considered okay and normal, when actually I've had mortifying situations with patients who are in the throes of depression or in the throes of an eating disorder, lost of a tremendous amount of weight, and someone will compliment them on their body because we are in diet culture. Oh, have you had that happen?
Actually, I just did a podcast a couple of months ago about my experience on how that was the catalyst for me. Was like the applause you get for the weight loss. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and so that's diet culture, and it's not right. And what's kind of fun to really, I don't know if fun's the right word, but I find it very encouraging on social media. I'm brand new to Instagram, is to see a bunch of health professionals and other folks rising up and saying, hey, this is bullshit. You know, this is hurting people. You cannot look at someone's body and know what's going on with them about their health or any status, and it's none of your business, you know?
Right.
It's heartbreaking, the stories I hear from my patients. The way I keep my sanity through this is I really believe that we can change culture one conversation at a time. Some of our most meaningful relationships and conversations are with people that we know. And so sometimes, you know, we don't get on a big old soapbox, which I love to do in front of crowds. On a one-on-one level, the way I might be talking about is quite different, but kind of deconstructing, you know, some of these beliefs.
Right. It's so true. And where do you think it starts? When does diet culture start in our lives?
You know, depending on your family, it can start at a very young age. I have a patient I'm working with right now. She can remember being a toddler and having this expectation of what appearance should look like and about what you should eat. And I was just reading a study, and I don't remember the details, but it had to do with toddlers in preschool who were concerned about their eating and becoming fat and these types of things. And so It's all around us. And when you sometimes take a look at children's books and how jokes are being made about sizes of bodies and so on, that's a form of diet culture as well.
Right.
And then there's a group of folks who think that they're helping, people by being healthy. It's like we have to remember health includes more than our physical health, it includes our mental health. And we can be healthy at a variety of different sizes in our bodies.
Right. That's the point I love that you make is, that health at every size is absolutely a concept. And it's interesting for me with a 7-year-old, it's like, okay, so if she's 3, why are we buying her Barbie dolls with teeny tiny waists? And for me, it's shocking as a mother to see how early it does start.
That's actually a really, really good point. The toys that we play with, and then looking at the diversity of body sizes and in our kids' toys and in our books. And on a related note, my son, who's an adult now, but when he was a toddler, was diagnosed with celiac disease. And this was back when gluten wasn't even a thing, but that's the only treatment is a gluten-free diet. But it affected his growth. He was short stature, but we also knew from testing he would catch up in his growth as a teenager. So I was constantly working with him, and I used to quote Yoda from Star Wars. And one of his sayings is, "Size matters not. Size matters not."
And that's so good.
Yeah.
Surely if Star Wars is saying it, we're all going to get on board.
Yeah.
Right. I love it. Okay. So now sort of do an introduction on what does intuitive eating look like? So if we're looking at diet culture and then we're going to sort of work against that, tell us about your book and intuitive eating.
Well, it was first published in 1995, so we're looking at almost 25 years ago. And we can honestly say back then it was research inspired, in terms of we were looking at the frustration. Elise and I, Elise Rush, the co-author, we were both in private practice. We were working on weight loss with our patients, designing these beautiful meal plans, and it wasn't working. It was frustrating, and our patients were feeling broken. And it's like, this is wrong. There's something wrong with this system. So we looked at our clinical experience. We took a deep dive into the research and also what was going on just in mass media in terms of some of the contemporary writers like Hirsch and Munter, Overcoming Overeating. And long story short, came up with this idea about what does eating look like from a healthy perspective, from a whole framework, and came up with this idea of 10 principles. And the thing that's so cool about it is, first of all, it was our publisher's idea to break our manuscript into principles because it was more how to. But what it did, it was very fortunate for us, is it made it measurable. And Tracy Tilke out of Ohio State University created the Intuitive Eating Assessment Scale, which he has now updated. And so basically it asked the question, who is an intuitive eater? What are the characteristics, and so what? Does it matter? And the answer was, yeah, it really matters. And so today there's over 90 studies showing benefit of looking at intuitive eating, which is basically connecting to your body, and honoring what it needs. So in one way, it can sound overwhelming to be trying to go against diet culture or to disconnect from it. But all it really is you don't have to go fight diet culture. I fight it. I really take it on because I'm a professional. But on an individual level, all of this is about you shifting your perspective, shifting your focus to what's going on in my body. What do I need today? What do I need now? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need rest? Do I need self-care? Those types of things. And so it can be really incredibly life-changing. And I get letters and emails and all kinds of stuff from people describing how much their life has changed. And I never get tired of hearing about this. And I think part of the reason it's so life-changing, it's not just the stopping of this insatiable background anxiety of worrying about every morsel of food you put into your mouth. But I think because you start connecting and trusting your body, there are more ramifications that cross over. You start trusting your instincts and your gut reactions to making decisions in your life. You're more grounded in yourself as opposed to trying to please the expectations of culture.
Right. I love that you speak to that, because what has been my experience when I've done intuitive eating with my clients and walked through is not only do they trust their body, but they trust themselves in the world.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
It becomes bigger than I trust myself to eat. And it moves to I trust myself to feel my feelings, and I trust myself to get through hard times. And I think it becomes bigger than just about your relationship with food.
Exactly. And I think
Yes.
it ties back around to what I was talking about earlier, that interoceptive awareness. It's truly our spidey sense. And the fact that we have this treasure trove of powerful information to get our biological and psychological needs met. I think it's one of the coolest things. And research is starting just to explode on that aspect alone, on interoceptive awareness. So it's just like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's why it's such a difference, because then when we also stop all of this worry around our eating and our bodies, we're connecting more to not just our own relationship with ourselves, but with the relationships that are meaningful in our lives. We're not preoccupied. We're not turning down social invitations because you don't know what to wear because of your body or what food that they're serving. And you get more connected with what your life's purpose is or what's important to you.
Right.
I can't tell you the amount of sessions with clients with buckets of tears in terms of the grieving process of all the time that was wasted in pursuit of something that's not even pursuitable. Well, that sounded weird.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Make up words sometimes, but when you start looking at the research, it really starts pissing me off, to be honest. I have this big old heart for my patients in the world, and the fact is that dieting doesn't work. And what folks don't seem to understand, actually, they get that it doesn't work in the long term, but there's this idea that, well, if my doctor says it, then it's okay. It's like, no, even if your doctor says to go diet or your dietitian says that, it's not supported by the research. What it shows over and over again is that your odds of gaining even more weight than what you started, is so much higher. Most folks that don't know that,
Right.
and so it just becomes such this maddening battle.
Right. Right. I read the whole Marie Kondo book,
Oh,
and about cleaning up and I went through our garage and I found this stack of books. This is embarrassing actually to say, but I think it's kind of
do tell.
hilarious. Is this stack of journals filled with food journals, like calories, like broken down. And I think, how many hours did we waste here? Like, how many moments? How, like, that is just the case for so many people. And if I look at those books and those like lists that just, I can't even wrap my head around it now, 10 years later. But I think about how much the diet culture was caught and how many rules were involved, like the rules, right? So what would be your advice for people early in that stage of pulling away from the many rules that their doctor and pediatrician and OBGYN has shared with them?
I think one of the things that's so important and not so much appreciated, it's real important to go slow. That this construct that you've built around these rules, this temple, is going to take a while to dismantle. And that's really, really okay. Sometimes what happens is folks will hear me on a podcast like this, or they'll read the book. Oh my God, I want to be there. And they have this high sense of urgency. And I get that. But to dismantle all these rules that you've been so tied into, it's going to take time. And it's really okay to go about a pace that feels comfortable to you. So looking at rules that just of themselves, if you want actionable steps, you could one day just sit and start writing down all your rules. And actually, I wouldn't even say one day. I'd keep it on your phone or some little notebook, because you're going to keep, every time you eat, you're going to remember another rule. Oh yeah. And then I have people rank them, in terms of really a scary rule to let go of, or kind of an okay rule, and something in between. And then we start working on the easy rules first. Because when you work on the easy rules, you start to build confidence. It's like, okay, I got this. Okay, I got this,
Right.
And what happens is, as someone's starting also connecting now with their bodies in terms of hunger and fullness and satisfaction, they start to see that their bodies work. And one of my favorite things to do in session with somebody is to point out, your body's working. I had a patient last week, her stomach growled in session. And I'm very careful not to own someone else's experience. And luckily, she said something before I questioned her what was going on. And she goes, oh, I'm hungry. My stomach's growling. And I said, yeah, I can hear it. It's so delightful. Can we do a little experiential activity around this? And we did. We had her connect deeper with that. And it was so funny because I've been working with her for a while. She goes, I knew you'd get all excited about this. And I Because every time you hear a cue, it means your body is working. It's working. It's normal. Hunger is normal. It's not something to be out tricked. It's not
Right.
something sneaky. It's our normal connection. And this particular patient had so much frustration of not connecting with hunger. And I think it's perfectly fine if you find hunger to be annoying. That's great. But let's just not label it as wrong. It's a normal thing like breathing. It's a normal thing like your heart beating.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let me ask you a couple of questions first, and then I want to go into some of the questions the followers has asked. Is what happens when we're not practicing intuitive eating? Like, share the cycle that, say, one of your clients or patients might come to you with.
Okay, some of the classic things I see, if they're not doing intuitive eating and they're following rules or they're dieting or some kind of plan, I often look at not just the rules themselves, but what's the qualitative nature? Are these rigid rules? And what happens if they perceive that they break a rule? And quite commonly, the rules are rigid. And when they break a rule, they say to themselves, I blew it, so what the heck? Might as well get it while I can. And then they get involved in what I call Last Supper eating. Well, I'm never going to be able to have ice cream again, so I might as well have it now while I'm letting myself do it. So there's this intense drive to eat. And then it terrifies them. And now they have this false evidence. Oh, see, I can't be controlled around food. I better stick back to my rules. And it becomes this really vicious cycle where they become more and more disconnected and afraid of the normal process of eating.
Right. What does that do to their body, that cycle?
Well, it does all kinds of it does a big number on their body and on their mind, because they get very dysregulated. And a lot of this research first came out from Peter Herman and Janet Polivy, and they used to call it, well, they do call it the restraint theory. And it was this phenomenon with dieters, basically, in which they'd have these rigid rules around eating to control their weight. But the moment something happened, an event, an emotion that broke the restraint, all hell broke loose. And that's what got my attention. I was reading one of their very scholarly papers, and they're talking about the counter dysregulation effect, blah, 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 how they're disconnected with their bodies. And they said it's the what the hell effect of eating. I go, oh my God, they know what they're talking about. That's what happens. So the more you ignore your body, the more confused you become about your body, and then you don't trust it. And that's the part that's really sad. I have people crying, literally saying, I don't even know how to eat anymore. I can tell you, I can count macros, I can tell you this, but I can't tell you how to eat. And so one of the things I'll say is like, well, what diet has actually taught you ever to connect to your body? None. How about growing up in your life? Was that reinforced? No, my mom and my dad were always on diets. So, then it would be really understandable that this is foreign and this is really scary, but this is really, really workable. And that's one of my favorite words. It's workable. It's a workable situation.
It's a skill that we can learn.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens to your body physiologically, but again, it's mind body, is you walk around in this constant state of hunger, and it's a low level hunger. And as far as your body is concerned at a cellular level, they're thinking like, I'm speaking for the cells now. I do this a lot. I'm speaking for the cells. And they're saying, oh my God, she's trying to kill us. We got to get her attention. So we're going to throw up some cravings here into her mind stream and the cravings aren't broccoli. It's going to be carbs. It's going to be sweets. It's going to be desserts. We got to get her attention. She says she'll feed her body. Then meanwhile, we have a cascade of hormonal effects that are going on again to get our attention to start eating. And so what ends up happening is there's this tension of constantly thinking about food, wanting to eat, but then having these rules that you can't. And this pressure and this gets so tightly wound that finally when eating happens, it feels like an all and out binge. And sometimes it is. And that's what we see a lot from the research too, that dieting or food restriction is the gateway to binge eating. And a lot of folks don't really know that. That's how powerful hunger is. Your body thinks you're trying to kill it. So it's a very reasonable compensatory mechanism to then get you to eat. That's actually normal as far as the cells are concerned. And the cells are going, hell yeah, we got to eat. We got to eat,
I love it. I really do. So let me ask you some questions.
All right, go.
Okay. These are from the followers. First question. How do I avoid the extremes? I'm either eating too healthy or too unhealthy, and it's compulsive.
Okay, that's a really good question. And that's classic, by the way, in terms of diet mentality. Diets kind of teach you all or none. You're either following the plan or you're off the plan. So first, it's important to realize your mind's been conditioned by dieting. That's why these extremes happen. So one of the ways that really helps to even get into these extremes, the first step is actually feeding your body enough food often enough. Do not underestimate the power of hunger. So honoring your hunger is really important. And so sometimes what I will do as a first step, even though honor satisfaction or aim for satisfaction in your eating is like a sixth principle, sometimes I start that as a first one. Aim for satisfaction in your meals and your snacks, because if you're under eating, that's not satisfying. And if you overeat, that's ultimately unsatisfying. And aiming for satisfaction is pleasure-based. And I've had a lot of people say to me, I have no idea what sounds good to me because they've been on so many diet plans. So that might be a really nice way to begin, and begin with some curiosity. And if you find yourself going into the extreme of overeating, gently take a step back and be curious, gently curious on, oh, what were the conditions that created this? Did I go too long without eating? Was I getting rigid again back into my rules? And it's normal to go back and forth as you're going through this process.
Right.
So it's expected, actually. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. How can I work with emotional eating, especially excusing quote unquote bad eating because of a hard day?
Okay. So this is a loaded question. And this is something I would do with a patient if they were asking me this. And I'll say, oh, just that perspective is kind of loaded, because the moment you say bad, we're talking about moralistic terms. And so sometimes I will teach my patients to edit their thoughts. And I'll use words like, let's call it a challenging day, or eating in a way that you're not connected. Therefore, it's still factual. But the moment you start adding a morality and a judgment, you start to feel bad. And that, now I'm using judgmental word, you start to feel uncomfortable, that increases anxiety. And as anxiety increases, if you're someone who turns to food to cope, it actually escalates that mechanism. So I have a two-step question I usually do with this, and I describe it like riding a bike. And on this bike are two wheels, as you know, it's a standard bike. And these two wheels are going to be two questions. And the two questions are, what am I feeling right now? What do I need right now? And this need, in terms of relating to this feeling I'm experiencing. And for a lot of people, simply asking the question, what do I need right now, is therapeutic, because they often don't recognize they've got needs. They've been serving everyone else except themselves. So someone who's coming home from work asking that question, they could be exhausted. They can also be very, very hungry. You know, sometimes I see this happen with binge eating. They're actually very stressed out and very hungry. And if you can recognize that, is it possible that I'm meal hungry? So let's see, what do I need? Maybe I need some nourishment. Maybe I need to find a way to relax. And then if I still want to have some cookies or cakes or whatever, let me feed my body first my meal and see how I feel about this other. And notice I'm not saying don't eat the cookies, don't eat the cake. But when you're meal hungry and you start off with these other kinds of foods, it's going to take a meal's worth to feel satisfied, but physically it doesn't feel good. And then emotionally it doesn't feel good, and it becomes problematic. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does.
Okay.
Right. So another loaded question. What if you have, and they've put have in capitals, have to lose weight because of health reasons?
Okay. I love this question because it's one of the biggest problems right now in healthcare. And it's this. Remember, we were talking about diet culture earlier, and that is that diet culture has hijacked healthcare. Diet culture has hijacked medicine, policy, and research. Because here's the really interesting thing. There's been a ton of research out now showing, number one, losing weight from food restrictive practices is not sustainable. This has been shown over and over and over again. And what it ends up doing is causing more problems, both biologically and psychologically. So what I say, it's like a doctor prescribing you a brand new medication to unclog your arteries. Let's say it's to lower cholesterol. And maybe in the first 2 years, it's awesome. But in year 3, you're having a heart attack. There's no way in hell a doctor would prescribe that medicine. And yet that's what they're doing for weight loss. It's something that doesn't even work. And then when you start looking at the data in terms of weight and health, it's not shaking out, because a lot of this is based on body mass index, which is a horrible, inaccurate way to assess somebody's health. It was never meant to be a health assessment. So what do you do instead? Because someone can have health issues. Well, what we do is we focus on sustainable behavior change. I just had somebody last week who came in with high blood pressure. And she said, I'm afraid when I see my doctor, they're going to say lose weight. And I said, that's not, if you go on a diet, sustainable. But there are some things we can be doing in terms of adding more fruits and vegetables. And I told her about a protocol using medical nutrition therapy that's sustainable and doable. You can do things like finding movement that feels good. So my answer to the question is absolutely focus on health behaviors that are sustainable. Weight is not a behavior. And I think one of the most shocking studies to come out recently was 2 years ago, the study on the biggest losers from one of the episodes. It was a 6-year later follow-up study. And I will tell you what, even though it's small, only 15 people, it was shocking because these folks had less muscle mass than when they began the biggest loser, extreme exercise, extreme dieting, and their metabolic rates were still lowered. So that's what we have to look at, shifting the whole conversation to weight neutrality or weight inclusive care. Because what's happening now is a lot of patients don't want to go see their doctors because they're going to get the lecture about you need to lose weight. And the truth is, you as a patient, as a consumer, have the right to say, no, thank you. I choose not to be weighed, you know?
Right. And show me the evidence.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Oh, I love doing that. Show me the data. Can you show me the studies where this has been done on a human being and a group of human beings that's sustained for 5 years or longer?
Yeah.
Guess what? It doesn't exist.
Right.
Isn't it something we've known this since the late 40s? And that's the thing I think that's the hardest to wrap your mind around for most people, because when you're getting the pressure now from your doctor, when we first wrote intuitive eating, the pressure was just coming from the weight loss industry and the beauty industry. And now it's coming on every front. And then it feels awful, but there's a way through this. That's the bottom line.
Right. Right. You just sort of gently grin and smile and just let them fight you and just keep going on your way, right?
Yeah.
All right. So the next question, what if I have a fear? And again, a lot of this is related again back to anxiety, is what if I just have this ongoing constant fear of gaining weight?
Okay, well, that has to do with our fat phobic society. And that's another consequence of diet culture that has put forth a belief that I'm lesser of a person because my size is different. And so we're looking at this answer now in two ways. We're talking about, we need to change the system. We need some social justice. But on an individual level, how do we work with this? And the truth is, what I do with fear is this. And you can tell me, this is your expertise, and I'm just a dietitian. But the way I work with this with eating is I'll say, I actually respect fear. We have to acknowledge it's here in the room with us. The issue, in my opinion, is we can't let it hijack you or talk you into doing things that are going to hurt you. And often we're looking at some kind of exposure therapy, in this case, feeding your body. And one question I often ask my patients, not to be a smart ass, but is, do you like living this way in this perpetual fear? I can't imagine that it feels good. And I love this question because often when I look at dieting is a reactive action on that fear. It's reactive, and dieting becomes a coping mechanism to that reaction of fear. And so sometimes for some folks, their biggest step is not giving into the fear by starting another food plan with some kind of fancy name on it, when all it is food restriction. So then the question really becomes, what do you need in order to tolerate the fear in your here and now body? What do you need in order to move forward? And many times they'll say, I don't trust my body. I don't think my body works. And sometimes I'll say, if I know them really well, I'll say, yeah, I don't blame your body. Because the way you've been treating it, you haven't been nice to your body. Sometimes you feed it, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you over-exercise it, sometimes you don't. And then the little cells will pipe in. They'll say, Evelyn, you have no idea. She's been making us fun and we haven't been eating and we're so tired. So when you treat your body in extreme ways, it's not realistic to expect consistent feedback. But if you treat your body kindly and consistently, you're going to get a gift of consistency. What is it going to take in order to be kind and consistent to your body on a regular basis? And that's when we start packing this down. Yeah.
I love it. And that is so in line with the work that we do. I do a ton of exposure and response prevention work. And you were talking before about that hierarchy of, the least scary step to the hardest. And that's what we do, is we don't let fear make that decision. We lead by values, and we work our way up the hierarchy of, what scares us. So I think that's so in tune with the work that we do on the anxiety front, which I love.
Isn't that cool?
I know.
And see, this, I just had this conversation with a patient today that when you're healing your relationship with food, this relationship mirrors other relationships in your life, whether it's your relationship to fear, relationships to certain individuals or certain situations. And so this becomes cross training, it strengthens these kinds of things and cultivates trust and this attitude of, I'm a brave warrior. Because I think it does take bravery, it does take courage to look at your mind.
So much. And just to make space for those emotions when they come up as well. So it's so beautiful. Right. Okay. How do you make all foods neutral while also finding joy in food?
Oh, I love that question. I love that. Does it spark joy in you? So the one way to help you through this is when we're talking about neutrality with eating, we're really talking about emotion and neutrality, that you are not a good or bad person based on if you ate a fresh apple versus a piece of apple pie. So there's no morality. And I find sometimes if we use that language, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, that I can buy into that. You can certainly make an argument that some foods have more nutrients in them. But again, we have to step back and look at the totality of our health. And that is if someone has rigid rules around eating, they don't allow themselves to eat the pie or whatever it is, that when they finally do have it, it usually becomes a say farewell to food fest. And you're going to have 5 pieces of pie, not the one, and not enjoying it to your biggest content. And one of my biggest delights is there's a phenomenon. I'd love to see research on it. I haven't seen anything published, but a phenomenon I see when people make peace with food. And sometimes they discover they don't even like it. They don't hate it. But what was happening is they had so much excitement on sneaking in the food that they weren't tasting the food. And they were having so much fear and guilt around it. They weren't tasting of that either. And so finally we remove all these morality parameters. And now it's just the food. It's like, what? I'm going to taste again because I can't believe it doesn't taste fantastic. And,
Right.
And then sometimes too, the food's going to be amazing, and in that case, you'll evolve into a place of, well, why am I willing to eat it in a way that doesn't make me feel good? Why do I want to eat it while I'm driving? Or why do I want to eat massive quantities that leave me not feeling good?
Right.
Because when you can have food whenever you want to, then it removes the urgency and you get to ask, well, how do I want to feel? If I eat this right now, am I going to enjoy it? That kind of stuff. You get to be in charge. Yeah.
I love it. That was a rule changer for me of just eating what you enjoy. I was like, oh, I'm allowed to do that. Like I remember that moment. My eating disorder therapist said that, like, you're allowed to enjoy it. And I was like, oh, don't think I'd ever thought of that. That's brilliant.
It's wonderful. And food is meant to be enjoyable. We get a nice little dopamine hit when we do that. It's pleasure-based eating. Yeah.
So good. So good. Okay, so you talked briefly about this, but what about with mood changes? How do we intuitively eat when, let's say, we fall into a deep depression and nothing sounds good?
Yeah, so this is where we go back into that whole self-care thing in terms of, and especially as you know, when someone once has had a major depressive incident, they're going to likely have another one that the odds are so much higher. I forget the data, but it's very high. And so part of it's just recognizing, oh, I'm sliding into this depression thing. What do I need in order to take care of my body? And what am I capable of doing from an energy standpoint? Because the one thing about depression, as you know, you have no energy. Apathy is really high. It's like, meh. And so then it's like, okay, what can I tolerate? And I do it like that. It's kind of like brushing your teeth. If the food's not going to thrill you, what is it that I can do today? And actually with some folks that I work with when the depression's really high, especially in the beginning, it's like, well, if we need to look at takeout, let's look at takeout. If washing dishes is too much for you right now, I get that. Let's do all paper plates. And we're not talking about a lifetime of eating this way. We have to respect budgets and boundaries and those kinds of things. But when you're in this transition and you can recognize it, I think it's really helpful to know what can you eat that feels okay. I think if everyone could answer that question, it would be helpful because I call it heavy metal jacket time. Oh, time to put on the heavy metal jacket. I'm going to make sure I go to bed at a reasonable hour and I'm going to make sure I feed my body, that I go too long without eating regardless of how I feel. And what can that be? And I tell my patients, I don't care if you eat the same breakfast every day. I don't care if you eat the same lunch every day. And they're like, oh, what? You're a nutritionist. I go, I know. But I'm looking at, we can look at variety and all those things later, but right now we have to look at where you're at and what you're capable of doing. And to have no nutrition is going to actually amplify your depression. And by the way, for those who have anxiety, it's going to amplify anxiety as well, because blood sugar swings can mimic the same sensations that you feel when you have anxious events. So what can those kinds of things be? And this is where I start talking about, it's funny when people have nausea or when they're feeling like an ant kind of mood. Often my experience is savory foods tend to sound good. Well, what about a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup? That happens to be one of my favorite things. And actually, I don't need to say that to a patient because I don't want to pressure them. But sometimes I start with what I know and then just throw in some other ideas,
Right.
Yeah.
So good. Okay. So I want to respect your time. If you could give one piece of a message, what would you say to the anxious person? What would you like to share with them?
Oh my gosh. That's such pressure. But what I want to
I'm
say
sorry.
is, no, but you know what it is? Because I'm constantly connecting to my patients or who's out there listening. And I feel so strongly about this work, and that viewing your eating as a source of suffering is so unnecessary, that you can do this. This is workable. And we just start with one step. What's one step you can take today? Could you honor your hunger today? Could you honor your hunger consistently? Could you let go of one food rule today? Because as you begin with that one step, you start to cultivate a little bit of trust. Every time you honor hunger with one bite of food, you're rebuilding trust with each bite of food. I got chills right now as I'm saying this, because it gets me. It's a healing effect every single time. And I think what happens for a lot of people, this feels overwhelming. Diet culture conditions us to think we should have instantaneous results, and you cannot crash course intuitive eating, because this is a journey of one. It's about you getting to know yourself on the inside out. No one can do that for you. I can guide somebody, I can facilitate, but only you can listen.
Right.
You got this is what I want to say. You deserve to have a life that you're living and thriving, not surviving and preoccupied and worried about your eating and your next event and what you're going to wear. I want you to look in the eyes of your children and of your lover and connect with yourself. Oh my God. Yeah.
I got the goosebumps too.
I did too. I just inspired myself.
You're like, I just motivated myself. I love it. Which
I
was
feel so strongly about this. I have a passion that yeah.
I just love you for it.
Oh, thank you.
I really do. I really do. One question, I know I said that was going to be it, but how long should people expect? You said it, it takes some time. How long would you expect someone to grab the basic concepts?
It's probably the same answer when someone asks you, how long is it going to take me to overcome my anxiety? And it depends on the confluence of how long you've been stuck in this, how long you've been hijacked by, in this case, diet culture. When you're someone who's been put on a diet as a toddler, and I have a lot of adults where that's the case, it's going to take you longer. Not because you don't get it, but you never were taught to trust your body. So it's different for everybody. And I've had patients who get this in a matter of months. And these are people who have read intuitive eating. They're highly, highly motivated, and they haven't been in diet culture for very long at all. But the truer answer is it's going to be a longer course, because it requires so much listening. It's not an overnight thing. And I just say, hang in there and keep noticing the progress along the way. Notice life unfolding and the joy that you start connecting with as these rules and these obsessions and the anxiety around eating in your body start to melt away.
Right. I love it. And then keep calling BS on diet culture.
Oh, you got to call BS on diet culture. But you know what? Here's what I also want to say, because I have patients who are newer into this and like, yeah, go get them, But what they also realize, they're still like little puppies. And it's okay if you're not ready to advocate for other people. It's okay just to work on your own journey. And if at some point you want to advocate and change the world, you go for it. But sometimes when you go to, a family event, you don't have the energy to go into a discourse with somebody. And that's okay. Maybe the best you can do is remove yourself from the conversation. You don't have to change the world right now.
Right.
I do.
Right. Well, like you said, one conversation at a time.
Yeah.
Love it. Where can we hear all about your wisdom?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm on social media now. I'm on Instagram, Evelyn Tribole. I've got my website, got intuitiveeating.org. And by the way, we just found out we got the green light from our publisher. We're gonna be updating our intuitive eating book for a 25th anniversary edition, but that won't be out till next year. So
wow.
Yeah.
You saw my copy. It's like the oldest version.
I love it. I've had people come in with burnt out copies, torn copies. Someone give me a copy or show me. Her husband wrote squibbles all over it. It's the cutest little thing.
I love it.
It's been well used, right?
Oh, it has so much love. I really appreciate you being on and talking with us. It just means a lot to me.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for spreading the word.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.